Before we begin, I have a quick note. The next part comes from a Zoom session where I was practicing reading some formulas from my 2 newly published books. But when I listened back, I thought maybe there's a better way to share it. In this version, you'll hear 2 friends talking with me, asking simple questions, making small comments, and laughing sometimes. They really helped me explain the ideas more clearly. So I decided to use that recording just as it is. I hope it feels like a natural conversation, not a lecture. Alright, let's get started. Hello and good afternoon from Japan. It's just past noon here, and I'm so happy to be joined today by 2 wonderful friends. Zach, you are just 1 hour ahead, right? Also, are you doing okay with all that snow over in Australia? I saw the news and it looked intense.
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for checking. The snow hit hard down south in the tablelands, but up here in Cairns, it's totally fine. Sunny and warm as always.
Glad to hear that. No snow on the palm trees then.
Not unless you count sunscreen.
And Chloe, our Alaska trip was amazing, wasn't it? You got off a bit early in Vancouver, right? How are your mom and sister doing?
They're doing great. We all really enjoyed the trip. I just wish I could have stayed on the ship a little longer.
I made it back to Japan safely, by the way. And you know what? This is actually the first time the 2 of you are meeting. Zach, this is Chloe. I met her last year in Vancouver. And Chloe, this is Zach. We met during an Indigenous cultural tour in Cairns. All right, how about a quick introduction from each of you?
Sure. So I'm Zach. I live up in Cairns, in Northern Australia. I do a bunch of different things. Guiding rainforest tours, selling candles at night markets, and sometimes helping out on dive boats. I like to stay flexible and outdoorsy, and I ask dumb questions about math when Emmy lets me.
Nice to meet you. I'm Chloe from Vancouver, Canada. I work remotely for a nonprofit that focuses on cultural education and environmental protection. I'm not a math person either, but I do care a lot about how we tell stories, especially across cultures.
Perfect. Now that we are all settled in, let's dive into today's conversation. Actually, I might have kept it quiet until now, but I have a little announcement. Well, not so little. I told both of you by email, but I want to say it here too. I recently published 2 books. Yay! Still officially out in the world. They're part of a series called We Must Know. The first volume is titled We Will Connect, and the second is We Will Be Here. Both are available as paperbacks in both English and Japanese. Yes, you've both had a chance to read them, right?
Yes, I read We Will Be Here on Kindle during my flight back. So thoughtful and unlike anything I've seen.
Yeah, I flipped through We Will Connect. I'm not a book person, but this one had equations and stories. That got my attention.
Thank you both. So today's session is kind of a warm-up for a future YouTube recording where I'll introduce the books properly. So I'd love your help with advice, reactions, or even pronunciation coaching. Let's start with the first theme. Connect. They're in the title of the first book. Chloe, I know you finished We Will Be Here, but you had a look at We Will Connect too, right? What did the word connect mean to you in the context of the book?
Yes, I did. I thought it was about building new relationships between people, but I kept reading. It started to feel broader. Philippines about connections between cultures or between people and systems. Phillies, when those links are weak or hidden, they're still there. Friends made me think about those invisible threads, how they're shaped, broken, or maybe repaired.
Yeah, I think I get that. Meet a lot of people whose families have both Indigenous and settler roots. It's not always obvious and not always talked about, but it's there, in the everyday. There's no clear line, you know.
The second title, We Will Be Here, actually came from a very simple phrase, I am here. But for me, it was a big question. Before stepping into another culture, I had to ask myself, am I really here? If I'm not grounded in my own place, how can I truly meet someone else? So this title became a way to check in with myself.
When I first saw the title, I remembered something my sister always says. Take a deep breath and just be here. Streamlined that a lot. It's yoga, by the way. At first, I thought it was just one of those spiritual sounding lines. But as I read your book, I started to realize it means something deeper. It's about existing, even without saying a word.
Honestly, when I first saw the title, I thought it was like a sign, we will be here from 10 to 5, or something like that. But the more it sank in, being here isn't about arriving. It's about staying, even when no one's looking, even when no one asks, not leaving. There's something quietly stubborn about that. Kind of cool, actually.
Exactly. This title isn't meant to convince anyone. It's just me deciding I'll be here to stay without raising my voice, but still fully present. That's not easy. But I felt like there are moments that ask for exactly that. By the way, these books use a few key terms repeatedly, and I believe it's important to define them clearly. The first is Indigenous peoples.
Good idea. Honestly, I've heard the term tossed around, but even I wonder sometimes, what exactly does it mean?
Yeah, and it can mean different things depending on where you are, but there's a widely referenced definition by Jose Martinez Cobo from the UN back in the 70s and 80s.
Right. According to his definition, indigenous peoples are communities who lived in their regions before colonization or conquest, and who have maintained their cultures, institutions, and spiritual beliefs since then. Blinked also recognize themselves as distinct from the majority population and often live in non-dominant positions in society.
So the key part is they still carry and protect their own culture?
Exactly. And even more important is self-identification. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, adopted in 2007, says clearly, whether or not someone identifies as indigenous should be the primary criterion. No one else gets to decide that for them.
There are more than 5,000 indigenous groups in over 90 countries, nearly 500 million people. And according to UNESCO, they're preserving most of the world's cultural and linguistic diversity.
That's incredible. We talk so much about globalization, but here's a whole ecosystem of cultures working to hold on to identity.
And if we talk about human history, the oldest known indigenous people are the San people, also called Bushmen, in southern Africa. Their lineage is over 70,000 years old, and they're hunter-gatherers, even now.
And genetically, they're closely related to what researchers call mitochondrial Eve, right?
Yes, mitochondrial Eve isn't a biblical reference. It's a genetic term. She's the woman whose mitochondrial DNA all modern humans can trace back to. She lived somewhere in Africa around 150,000 to 200,000 years ago.
So, like, scientifically speaking, we're all kind of distant cousins.
Exactly. And the San people still carry the most genetically diverse DNA of any human group alive today. That's part of why they're considered one of the oldest continuous cultures on Earth. All right, Let's move on to the second keyword that shows up in both books. Colonial. We don't hear often in daily life, at least in Japan, but it's actually everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard colonial used in architecture or fashion, like colonial style houses, but you're talking about something way deeper, right?
Definitely. In this context, colonial refers to colonialism, a structure of domination. It's about one group taking control over another's land, economy, and culture through violence, law, or ideology.
Many of our global systems today, laws, education, even what we call development, were shaped during the colonial era. And even after independence, those legacies often stayed in place.
So you're saying we might be using systems every day that weren't really built for us?
Yes, that's part of what people refer to when they talk about colonial influence or colonial legacies. Nang, that includes me. I was born and raised in Japan. I was educated inside a system, one that didn't really make room for indigenous knowledge or values. That's why I can claim to speak for indigenous people.
That reminds me of what Anival Quijano wrote about the coloniality of power, how colonial systems created racial, social, and political hierarchies that still persist today, even in supposedly post-colonial nations.
Exactly. So when I wanted to explore indigenous culture, I had to find a way to illuminate without speaking. This content, that's where math and models came in. They let me pose questions without trying to explain someone else's story.
You know, I guide people through rainforests all the time. And sometimes I wonder why certain trails exist or why maps are drawn the way they are.
Yes, even those maps might reflect colonial decisions. What was named, what was erased, what was worth protecting.
There's also the concept of neocolonialism, where a country might be politically independent but still economically or culturally controlled from the outside.
Like some big international banks setting rules for whole regions?
Exactly. Colonial power doesn't always look like armies anymore. Sometimes it looks like development loans or trade agreements.
And then there's restitution, like how some museums are returning artifacts taken during colonial times. It's not just about stuff, it's about stories and identity.
And who gets to define what culture means or what's valuable? Backstage, that's why I wrote these books, not to define, but to make space, to show how our systems are shaped and what we might have missed.
All right. I'm starting to see what you mean by mapping. Not just places, but power.
So the third keyword is credit creation. It might sound like something out of an economics textbook, but it's actually something that touches our lives every day, even if we don't realize it.
Wait, credit cards? Or credit scores or something?
That's part of it, but Emmy's talking about something deeper, how money is actually created in modern economies.
Exactly. A lot of people think banks lend out money that others deposited. But that's not how it works. When a bank gives a loan, it doesn't take it from someone else's savings. It just types numbers into your account, creating new money from scratch. Krang, that's what we mean by credit creation.
Whoa! So banks are just making money out of thin air?
Pretty much. Alphabetical money in our economy isn't from printed bills. It's created through bank lending. That's why things like bubbles or credit crunches happen. If banks lend too much or suddenly stop, the whole system gets shaky.
Right. So who's watching all that?
Central banks and regulators keep an eye on it by monitoring things like capital ratios or total lending volume. They also track how much money is circulating overall.
Like CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. There's a lot of talk in the US right now. If people start using digital money issued directly by central banks, the role of commercial banks in money creation might shrink.
In places like Florida and North Carolina, they are even passing laws to ban CBDCs. The concern is over privacy and surveillance.
Blimey, I thought we were talking about money, not politics.
Totally. That's the point. It's not just about economics. It's about culture and community too. These days, some places are experimenting with credit systems built on trust, cultural ties, and mutual support.
Oh, like Time Bank Vancouver, maybe? Wildcard, where I'm from, people can earn time credits by helping out at events or doing volunteer work. Nav exchange that credit for someone else's service. It's not money. It's built on trust and connection. And I've always found it fascinating.
I had no idea. Time credits? How does that work?
For example, if I help an elderly neighbor with their groceries for an hour, I get one time credit. Then I could use that credit to have someone help me with gardening or tutoring. It's not cash. It's more like supporting each other through time. And that trust becomes something people in the community can actually trade.
That sounds less like economics and more like a kind of cultural currency. In New Zealand, they are running pilot projects where Indigenous knowledge itself is recognized as value and building infrastructure to support it. They are trying to rethink what counts as credit-worthy.
We don't really have formal systems like that in Cairns. But hey, when you came in January, remember the storms? We had some wild squalls that month, flattened most power a few times, and all the car terminals went down. Traders just shouted, cash only, and hoped for the best. Alphabet, if you're internet spotty, it's hard to roll out stuff like this. What do you reckon, Chloe? How do you manage the system over there?
Yeah, that's a good point. In Time Bank Vancouver, it's mostly web-based. Each member has an account and manually logs what they offered and how many hours they earned. Can also rate other members and leave messages. So, yeah, it's digital, but it feels more like a record of trust than just data.
Sounds handy. I don't know, with Cairns weather, maybe not so easy here.
That's exactly why in We Must Know We Will Connect, I talk about how different regions have different infrastructure. Some of the models I use take that into account.
Yeah, like in Cairns, folks like me do a bit of everything. Guiding, helping on dive boats, selling candles at the markets. Everyone knows what folks are good at and we help each other out when needed. Confiscated like, hey mate, can you cover me today? And you just go. So you're trying to give that kind of thing a value, Emmy.
Things we thought couldn't be counted in dollars might gain value in new ways. Explore it, Emmy? Traveling around and testing it through equations?
Exploring. Not quite the Indiana Jones kind. I just try to avoid group tours when I travel. Get closer to how people really live.
Yeah, that tracks. When I met you at the night market, you were on your own, asking heaps of questions at the sports bar. Resign that night's match was intense.
Of course. I'm usually traveling solo, but not always. Thing is, when you're in a tour group, locals switch into tourist mode. It's not bad, just different. I try to blend in more naturally when I can.
So that's why you travel solo, huh, Emmy? I remember the first time we met, you were already deep in conversation with some locals at that sports bar. Man, that game that night was intense.
To close, I'd like to ask you both a question. Through the 2 volumes, We Must Know, We Will Connect, and We Must Know, We Will Be Here, Windshield, you explored systems, culture, narration, and the idea of position. Swallow. Where do you find yourself standing? Please feel free to speak from your own perspective. Chloe, would you like to begin?
Thank you, Emmy. Unaffected, honest, when I read the first book, We Will Connect, I was forced to reconsider what it means to be on the supporting side. that support was always a good thing. But I learned from your structural framing that support without listening can become mere interference. In We Will Be Here, the Zoom dialogue chapter particularly stayed with me. Silence, too, can be a form of testimony. So now, instead of stepping forward, I've begun to learn what it means to walk beside. Emmy, your books helped me begin that path.
Yeah, I'd like to say something too. When Emmy first showed me this cultural scoring formula, minimized. Wait, what? Wait, what? You're giving points to culture now? As I read further, I realized this wasn't about judgment. Borderline, it was about mapping what can't be seen. As a tour guide, I often talk about stories. But truthfully, I haven't always known whose story I was telling. Northwest before I even speak. Bracelets, myself pausing to ask, whose voice is this? So, yeah, maybe I've woken up a little too.
Thank you, Chloe. Thank you, Zach. If I had one wish for these books, it wasn't to hand anyone answers, but to create a place where we could pause and hold the question together. We will connect was my declaration. I cannot speak, but I can illuminate the structure. That was my stance. We will be here was a promise. To say I'm here might be the beginning of connection. The three of us from different places, holding back doing the same question, and talking like this. Perhaps that too is what we will be here means. But allow me to say one last thing. I will be more right again.
What is it?
What?
Even on the Bering Sea, I never got seasick. Pregnant during the editing of these books, I was taking motion sickness medicine.
You got seasick from your own formulas?
Yes, from my own misaligned scores and diagram orders. Crimson matter how many times I checked. Something would be off. The structure would fall apart. Normalizing the end, I wasn't bothering culture anymore. I was bothering myself.
And yet you brought it all the way here.
I did, and that's enough. Estimated I had to say about culture. Without speaking it, only illuminating it. Windshield. Won't write again. And now, I'll go back out.
Back out where?
Into a world that cannot be scored. Armenia behind structure and theory. I'll simply listen to the breath of people and the landscapes where they live. I'm heading back into the field.
That's what it means to be here, isn't it? To show your presence, not in words, but in posture.
So, in the end, we really did connect over Zoom, huh?
Yes, and we've learned how to say, we're here.